It says here, my name is Brandon Ivy. I'm the chairman this year for the Home Builders Association. We want to thank everybody for attending the Economic Outlook Industry Meeting. Greatly appreciate your participation. We also want to thank our industry partners over here. For those of you who are not aware, these are builders or members of our industry that contribute above and beyond the regular fees to help grow our association and to help provide more advocacy. And we really want to thank all of our members for their participation, our builder champions and industry partners. Let's see. Their support and guidance helps us provide education opportunities like today and create resources essential to our members and further our efforts to protect and preserve the home building industry in Greater Baton Rouge, which also includes Ascension Parish, which I'm just going to quickly briefly mention since the text messages and emails have been blowing up like furious. So I talked to Clint, who is proposing this ordinance, the moratorium in Ascension Parish, for those of you who do not know. And we talked about probably 30, 45 minutes. He is bent 100% of moving ahead with the moratorium. I tried to talk to him and provide alternatives and, hey, a lot of things, and he just shot every single thing down. I did tell him that we wanted to be at the table whenever they started coming up with the solutions and the fixes. I said it's important that our industry has a seat at the table versus them just trying to shove stuff down our throats when we have no say. So he agreed to that, that we would have a seat at the table, but they are not going to budge. So we've got a voter voice going out, and we are working diligently to try to build consensus and support from our membership and the business community to try to thwart this effort. They're going to introduce it Thursday, tomorrow night. It's going to be the introduction, and they're going to vote at the following meeting. I would encourage everyone who can to show up and to let other people know they need to show up at this meeting, because it is a very big deal. And now I would like to introduce our wonderful CEO, Karen.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for all of your participation in everything that we have going on. As you know, regulation and policy does increase a lot of our costs of building a home, which our wonderful speaker today, I will do an introduction right now, is Dr. Robert Dietz, the Chief Economist for NAHB, where he leads a team of 12 economists whose responsibilities include forecasting of housing and economic trends, survey research, and home building industry and policy analysis. He is the nation's leading analyst of the residential construction industry. Dr. Dietz has testified before the House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Finance Committee, and the Senate Banking Subcommittee on economic policy for housing, economic, and tax issues, and is commonly cited on CNBC, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and NPR. Prior to joining NAHB in 2005, Robert worked as an economist for the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation, where he estimated the federal budget impact of tax law changes associated with housing and real estate issues. He is a native of Dayton, Ohio, and earned a PhD in economics from the Ohio State University in 2003. Without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Robert Dietz.
Great. Thank you, Karen. It's good to join you all today. I wish I was joining you in person. I think we are getting closer to normal conditions. I was telling some people earlier today that I got cut off in Washington, D.C. traffic for the first time in over a year. That's an important moment. There hasn't been enough traffic for people really to cut you off, and we're getting back. We're getting back to rude traffic conditions. DC has the worst drivers in the country, and so that kind of felt like going back to normal. So I'm going to walk you through our current housing and economic outlook. This is the short version. Karen said, keep it to 20 minutes so we can get to some Q&A at the end. So be thinking about some questions and comments. Generally speaking, we're expecting growth this year. The headwinds are picking up. I think everyone in the room knows it. And it's not just building materials, although that's the top national challenge right now. It's regulatory issues. It's the typical kind of growing pains that come with growth. So where are we in terms of our headline findings? Well, the virus and the vaccine data really are showing promising gains. I think one of the things that we've learned over the past year is that if you're a public health expert or policymaker, if you want to get on the news, you got to lead with the most outrageous and the highest amount of doom factor. Well, right now the news is good. We should embrace that. In fact, we really think by the time we get to July and August that for most of the country, it is going to feel back to normal, even places like New York City and San Francisco. And that's good for the overall economy. So what does that mean? Well, accelerating growth here in 2021. And as I'm going to show you, we're going to have the best year for economic growth since 1984, since the Reagan administration. So it is going to be an outstanding year for economic growth, but that means higher interest rates as growth picks up. And we are concerned about inflation because a lot of the reason behind growth this year is really the large amount of stimulus that's been poured into the economy. Building materials, it's been covered a lot, certainly in the news. That's the top concern in the industry right now at a national level. The supply chains are a mess. We do think they're going to improve as we get into 2022, but builders should continue to expect delays and higher pricing for materials on through into 2022. For the forecast, I'll show you single family and remodeling construction growth should continue this year. Even multifamily construction is showing signs of some expansion this year after a tough 2020. And the big factor, given the fact that the costs are going up, we are risking housing affordability erosion this year. And if local policies are layering additional cost concerns, that's going to be frustrating for those first-time home buyers, particularly millennials that are looking to get in the market right now. The big thing when you think about it, community against community, is there's a race that's on right now. And those communities that are able to develop land and build homes, they're going to grow and their tax base is going to expand. And those communities that can't are going to wither on the vine. And we were already seeing that from 2020. California, as an example, had its first year of population decline in decades. They even lost a House of Representatives seat. And the reason for that was 100% due to housing. They have made it so expensive to build housing in California over the last 20 or 30 years. People are leaving. They're headed to the mountain states. And so that is a warning for communities going forward. You need to be able to build housing affordably to get that economic growth at the local level. So in terms of the macro conditions, as I said at the start, 2021 is going to be an outstanding year for growth. We're expecting about a 6.7% GDP growth rate. Again, the best year since 1984 in terms of overall growth. And look what we went through. Look on this slide in terms of the 2020 second quarter data, a negative 30% growth rate, the worst quarter for economic growth, basically in modern American economic history, and a reminder that government, when it wants to, can shut down the economy very, very quickly. And that's what we saw in the second quarter. The third quarter is a reminder that the economy at the end of 2019 had a huge amount of momentum going into it. So we had a fairly V-shaped recovery for that third quarter. And what we're looking for in 2021 is that rebound continuing. And then as we get into 2022 and 2023, cooling growth rates and getting back to a long run trend. Now, a footnote to this. This is more of a pet peeve of mine, which is there's been this claim that the US has not done particularly well compared to other countries during the virus crisis. We can have a debate over the virus data itself, but in terms of economic growth, the US economy actually did fairly well last year. Yes, we were down 3.5%, and that did have a lot of economic pain attached to it. But if you compare us to, and let's not compare ourselves to China, I think they kind of make up a lot of their data anyway, so we'll kind of push that to a side. But except for South Korea, which is virtually an island since it borders North Korea, if you look at our peer countries like France and the United Kingdom, they experienced declines of about 10% last year in terms of their overall size of the economy. So yes, it was a tough year last year for the US economy, but we fared better than much of the rest of the world. And then if you look at the reasons behind this, and this is the reason that we've got some inflation pressure right now, whether it's stocks or building materials, disposable personal income, which is the aggregate measure of incomes at the household level, they really benefited from multiple rounds of stimulus. So the expanded unemployment insurance benefits, the checks that went out to households, and you can see that in this blue line. It takes two spikes up in 2020 and 2021. Those are the big amounts of stimulus that really boosted personal income. Now that was deficit financed stimulus, so nobody paid for that, and that's the reason for the inflation pressure. But it certainly boosted income. And if you look at the red line, that's consumption. It actually declined last year because of a decline in the service economy. We weren't traveling, we weren't taking vacations. All those factors caused spending to fall. And so the difference between the blue line and the red line, that's household savings. So you had a really unusual recession in 2020 where household savings during a recession, they went up. So households' balance sheets actually improved last year. And one of the factors that has benefited from that improved household balance sheet status is housing. People have taken that money that they saved in 2020, they invested it in stocks, and they've engaged in remodeling and home buying. And that's the reason that housing really was a bright spot in 2020. So if we look at the overall labor market in terms of the macro conditions, yes, we've recovered from some of the job losses that we had in 2020, but right now the United States as a whole is down about 5% from our peak level of employment in February of 2020. So there's room for improvement. And the Baton Rouge metropolitan statistical area that's in blue here is basically mirroring the national trends, also down 5%. I gave a talk this morning to some builders in the Northeast, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island. They were in a lot worse shape. In fact, New York jobs right now are down 10% compared to their prior peak. So Baton Rouge is basically mirroring what we see at the national average, and there are places like the Northeast that are certainly lagging behind in terms of job recovery. And a lot of that has to do with whether or not they're open for business due to the virus rules that apply. Now, a big factor that certainly a lot of people are talking about is inflation. If you look at the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, it's called the core PCE, which is listed here in the red line. Over the last 4 years, it was growing at about a 1.8% rate. The Fed wanted to keep it right around 2%. So inflation was coming in lower than expected. And a lot of that was the benefits of technology. There wasn't a lot of room for price growth. In our forecast going forward in 2021, we have this measure of inflation getting above the Fed's target, up to an average of about 2.1%. So we are entering into a higher inflation environment, and I certainly don't have to tell builders or remodelers that the cost of everything is going up. And a lot of that, again, has to do with the amount of stimulus that was pushed into the economy, which means people have more dollars, but the amount of goods that those dollars are chasing hasn't changed. So Economics 101 says the price should rise. So what do we think in terms of the future of monetary policy and interest rates? Well, we got the minutes this morning this afternoon from the Federal Reserve's April meeting. And they basically gave a fairly positive outlook and an indication that the Fed is likely to be tightening sooner than many people think. And in fact, in our forecast, and you can see this in the blue text, we think they're going to begin what we call tapering in early 2022, if not at the end of this year. And that means they're going to stop buying mortgage-backed securities. Right now, the Fed is buying $40 billion a month in Fannie and Freddie debt, and that's keeping mortgage interest rates low. So they're going to stop doing that. They're probably going to announce it sometime this fall. And when that happens, mortgage interest rates are likely to rise a little bit. We saw that actually happen in the past cycle in 2013 during something called the taper tantrum, when mortgage rates went up about 80 basis points when Chairman Ben Bernanke announced the end of quantitative easing. We're hoping that it won't be as dramatic a change this time, but look for that in the fall. The other change, and that will probably happen in the first half of 2023, the Fed will begin hiking the federal funds rate, which is the interest rate the Federal Reserve controls. So tapering ends in 22, Fed rate hikes in 23. And so what does that mean then for home buying demand and mortgage interest rates? Well, the red line here gives our forecast. We think during the second half of 2022, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage is likely to get up above 4%. And the reason that 4% measure is kind of our threshold measure right now, a benchmark level to look for in the future. We saw back in 2018 when the mortgage interest rate, and you can see on this slide that red line kind of gets up near 5%, that caused a housing soft patch, which caused home sales to go flat for about 6 months. We think the rate at which mortgage interest rates will get to cause a similar housing soft patch is lower today because home price growth in 2020 was so high. In fact, we saw 10 and 11% gains in home prices nationwide. So a housing soft patch will likely occur when mortgage interest rates get somewhere between 4 and 4.25%. And we think that occurs during the second half of 2022. So we've got a pretty good runway for housing demand, probably about a year or more. But when rates get up to that level, and it doesn't sound particularly high compared to the early 80s or the early 90s, but a 4.25% mortgage interest rate is probably high enough to cause a significant amount of home buying demand to move to the sidelines and consider renting longer or living with their parents longer. So keep that rate in mind in that second half of 2022. Of course, the fundamental driver of housing demand is population growth. And yes, US population growth rate has declined over the last decade. You can see that from 2011 to 2020 in terms of those growth rates on the table. There's two reasons for that: lower immigration and birth rates are down. In fact, over the last 5 years, we've had some of the lowest birth rates in the United States since the Great Depression. And it's something, by the way, that I got wrong about 2020. I thought the lockdowns were going to produce a baby boomlet. Well, I was wrong about that. It didn't happen. I thought people would be bored, stuck at home, and that would be the result. It didn't happen. So the birth rates continue to decline, and the result is population growth rates continue to decline. That will have an impact on housing markets 10 years down the road. But the Baton Rouge area is actually doing fairly well compared to the state of Louisiana as a whole. You can see that Louisiana has actually had 4 years of population growth declines. And in contrast, Baton Rouge has been growing since 2018. And if you're growing, you need more housing, in particular, single family housing. All right, let's look at the supply side. We know the cost of everything in the construction industry is going up. This comes from the Producer Price Index. It's an inflation measure. Basically, inputs for residential construction costs are up 13% year over year. And that's data through February. Once we get the April data here in a few months, I expect that 13% to be 15 or even as high as 18%. So you can see that spiking. Yes, the cost of everything is going up, and it is appearing in the data. And when we survey builders in terms of the products that are in the shortest supply, and you can look at that as terms of the products that have the largest blue plus green region, it's appliances, framing lumber, OSB, plywood, windows and doors. Those are the products that builders report experiencing the highest price gains and the longest delays in delivery times. It's kind of interesting. If you look down at the bottom of this list, cement and concrete are actually doing fairly well. Now, I'm not sure if that's the case in your market, but it does suggest an opportunity maybe to do a fewer wood framed homes and move over to concrete framing. I know that's easier said than done, but it is kind of interesting, the mix between framing lumber being up at the top and concrete being down at the bottom in terms of most available in the product categories. In terms of lumber prices, well, you all know what lumber prices have done. They're up more than 320% over the last 13 months. We estimate that's adding about $36,000 to a typical newly built single family home, fully phased in based on the spot pricing. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but the futures market over the last 5 or 6 days have shown some easing. Now, when we say easing, they're suggesting by the time we get into 2022, that $1,500 per thousand board feet could decline down to 1,000. Now, we want to see it below 600, so that's certainly not good enough. But there is a sense that maybe we're past the peak of some of these growth rates. I said that back in December, though. I was wrong. You can see the kind of the head fake that occurred at the end of 2021, and prices continue to go up. We're just simply not producing enough domestic lumber, and it's something that NAHB is working with the White House and Congress to do whatever we need to do, workforce development, regulatory environments to get more sawmills in operation, as well as address some of the issues with the Canadian trade. The skilled labor shortage remains a challenge nationwide. The residential construction industry has done something remarkable over the last year. After losing several hundred jobs or 100,000 jobs in March and April, we've added more than 500,000 jobs nationwide. And that's because we had elevated unemployment through the rest of the economy, an ongoing labor shortage, and we took the opportunity over the last half of the year to bring workers into the sector. So that red line is a measure of the intensity of the labor shortage. You can see it was declining in 2020. The reason for that decline, non-residential construction was losing workers as we were adding them. So we're still short anywhere between 300,000 and 400,000 construction workers nationwide, and we need to continue those efforts to recruit people into the industry. All right, so we took a look at macro, the supply side. Let's take a look at the forecast. Nationwide last year, single family starts were up 12%. We were just shy of 1 million single family starts. That was the first time since the Great Recession. And our expectation is additional growth this year, given the really strong demand for home buying and the really lean inventory of resale homes, so only about a 2-month supply. So our expectations, we're going to get up above 1.1 million single family starts. We need to get to about 1.2 million to keep up with population growth and the need to replace older homes. But this should be a good year for growth. And looking at the local data, in 2020, the Baton Rouge area saw, according to the census data, about a 4% increase. This is about a 10% increase statewide, so a little bit lower in terms of the local area, but still a positive gain in an otherwise challenging year. And to give you a sense of how your area compares to the rest of the country, I thought I'd just put up a couple of quick maps. The counties in blue on this map represent the core counties of large metros. So you can think of these as the inner suburbs of some of the biggest cities in the country. The counties marked in blue last year grew at a 9% growth rate. Now, if you take a step out and go to more medium-sized cities, and this would include Baton Rouge, the core counties of those medium-sized cities in aggregate grew just under at a 16% growth rate last year. And if you take a further step out, so we're going to go outside the suburbs now of these counties in red to these counties in orange that represent the suburbs of those smaller metropolitan areas, those suburbs grew at a 21% growth rate last year. And this would be kind of your peer group. So yes, the Baton Rouge area was growing slower than a lot of these kind of higher growth areas. And frankly, a lot of them are in places that hadn't seen a lot of growth over the last 10 or 20 years. They were outer suburbs of markets in the Midwest, kind of old growth areas, and outer suburbs of markets in the mountain states, the new growth areas. They really took off last year because of housing affordability. People have a greater ability to vote with their feet, and they did so in 2020, and we think they will continue to do so in 2021 because of telecommuting and some other factors that are going to persist over the next couple of years. In terms of apartment construction, there was a decline last year in 2020, down about a 2% growth rate. We see a little bit of a gain this year in terms of 2021, and then basically hovering around the 400,000, 410,000 multifamily units over the next couple of years, particularly as the vaccine takes hold and returns demand back to some of these core areas. The Baton Rouge area, in terms of multifamily, about a 40% increase in 2020 for multifamily, again, according to the census data. And so that was actually stronger than the nation as a whole. And then lastly, the remodeling market, a really strong year last year, nationwide about a 7% growth rate. And we've got really strong measures of remodeler confidence in our quarterly surveys. We're looking for about a 9% growth rate in 2021, particularly as people pour some of those home price gains, the household equity that they obtained in their houses, and reinvest them in their homes. And so we're expecting a particularly strong year for remodeling here in 2021. And with that, I want to thank everyone. Again, that's kind of our quick version of the macro update. My Twitter account is here on the screen at Dietz _econ. And all the data that we walked through is available on eyeonhousing.org, which is our economics blog. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to take any questions in the room if we have time. And I can't hear if someone's asking something because you're on, there you go. I was going to say you're on mute.
Now can you hear me? Robert, this is Scott Bardwell in Baton Rouge. You talked about the cash influx, that's why you don't see boats on the market and used cars, all that kind of stuff. I've also heard that with the stimulus checks, it really has wiped out a lot of the labor in the mills, transportation, et cetera. We can maybe touch on that too, because my hope is that, when things get rolling in August, September, we should see a faster decline in some of these prices just because things are more back to normal.
Yeah, this is a great point. The transition to a normal economy is going to take some time. Now, for a while, there were a lot of economists, particularly on the left, who were saying, no, the expanded unemployment insurance benefits had nothing to do with employers unable to fill positions. And then the evidence became overwhelming. I mean, it was hard to go, at least in the DC area. I haven't been much outside DC, maybe North Carolina and Pennsylvania here in the last few months. But, you go past any restaurant, there's a help wanted sign outside. And so, I think the evidence, and this is sort of that street level evidence that even an academic has to admit is true, is that yes, some of the expanded unemployment insurance benefits pays more than holding a job. And I think there was a recognition, at least here in DC, that this was true when President Biden 2 weeks ago basically said, you know what, if you're getting unemployment insurance benefits, you need to take a job if you're offered one. And the fact that the Democrats were saying that is a good indication that yes, they recognize the problem. So all the surveys indicate right now that one of the challenges of a better labor market report is the fact that those benefits are flowing. And a good example of that was the last jobs report we had for April. All of us forecasters, including myself, were expecting about 900,000 gain in workers. And that came in and it was like 260,000. I mean, it was just sort of, why was it so low? Well, it's become harder and harder for employers to fill those positions. So I think from a policy perspective in DC, you are going to see kind of a renewed emphasis in making sure people take work for those jobs that are in demand. That's going to help the service sector the most, but we'll have spillover benefits for our industry, right? Construction, manufacturing, transportation, and energy. It'll be kind of a second order effect. And I think the fact that the Democrats have recognized that means there's now a bipartisan agreement to address that. I mean, it is certainly a problem. You see it in the most recent job openings data. You had the largest number of opened, unfilled jobs in American history, 8 million jobs that need to be filled right now.
Yes, thank you. Diane Baum. I was wondering, what do you anticipate in the next year with mortgage interest rates?
Yeah, so we think a gradual increase is going to happen. So right now, if you look at the Freddie Mac data, mortgage interest rates are hovering right around 3%. And in fact, we had a pretty strong takeoff. They were at 2.7% at the end of last year. They increased about 30 or 40 basis points, then retreated a little bit. And all of that has to come with the fact that as economic growth increases, the demand for capital goes up. When the demand for capital increases, interest rates go up. As simple as that. So higher growth environments have higher interest rates. Moreover, nominal interest rates are going to be pushed up because one part of the nominal interest rate is inflation. So you have higher growth, you have inflation, those factors are going to push interest rates up. So we're looking at about 20 basis point increases quarter by quarter. I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year, we're looking at somewhere between 3.6 and 3.8% of mortgage interest rates, still below 4. And then, as I said, as we get into the second half of next year in 2022, mortgage interest rates will get up above 4. 4 is sort of our warning sign. That's where rates get high enough that we think that some of those prospective first-time buyers, those millennials, start to go, at today's home prices with a 4% interest rate, the monthly housing cost gets high enough that I might take start thinking about this in a second look. It's not going to drive everybody out, but it'll be enough that it'll push some demand to the sidelines. And so that's where the moment of concern begins to happen, the second half of next year.
Hey, Rob, you can't see me, but I see your big head on the screen. It'd be good to see you.
Don't say that to Jerry Howard.
Good to see you in DC, when we can get back to that. I heard something recently, and I thought it was a rather good point. I'm curious about your take on it. Housing prices haven't actually declined except for once over the past 40 years. So I'm curious to know your take on that going forward. Do we actually expect to see these declines, or do we expect to see this as a new normal where we settle in?
So this feels ultimately like what we call a trap question in the game, which is something that will be held against me in 2 years. Okay, I'm going to go out and say that the growth rates for home prices right now are unsustainable. We know that, right? You cannot have 10 to 15% year-over-year gains in home prices when real income growth, not subsidized income growth, but real income growth is growing at about 2%. It's not sustainable. That said, I think the fact that we are underbuilt rather than overbuilt as we were, say, 15 years ago, means that what we're going to see is home prices will slow down in terms of their growth rate, but they're not going to go negative. In other words, the growth rate is going to go from 10% to next year more like 5% gains and then 2%, and get back to growing with income growth. You want home prices to grow with incomes. The fact that there's a deficit of housing is what's supporting some of those gains. So I know there's some gloom and doom type people who have said, we overshot over the last year and therefore home prices have to fall to get back. I think it's going to be more of a soft landing in this sense, that where we'll see the growth rates slow down. Housing supply will continue to expand to close some of that housing deficit, and we'll get home price growth that's a little bit more rational. So that's our forecast. That's what we've got built in. How could I be proved wrong? What would cause the market to cause home prices to fall? A really sudden jump in interest rates. If we're wrong about interest rates, so for example, if let's say inflation really begins to take off, we get Jimmy Carter style stagflation of high nominal inflation rates that cause interest rates to go up, that could cause home prices to fall, because then interest rates are rising considerably faster than incomes, and demand pulls back, and basically people would have to discount to sell homes. I don't think that'll happen. I think some of the inflation pressure is going to wear off as we get into 2022, and the labor market will continue to heal, and we'll end up with a fairly nice soft landing. The other risk is policy failure. If we get a big tax hike that reduces incomes, that too could cause home prices to fall. And that's certainly a message that we take to Capitol Hill and the White House.
Do we have anyone else? All right.
Well, I'd just like to thank Dr. Dietz for being with us today and providing this invaluable insight and knowledge. That concludes our meeting.
Thank you all.